Good afternoon. My name is Lohori Sioka, and I've been thinking about this question for some time, and I hope I can put it across as eloquently as it deserves. In the past years, we've seen the rampant rise of populism in the politics of our northern neighbors. In previous years, in previous times, to my understanding, it's been the mainstay of primarily poor nations where people's innate divisions can be exploited. Today, we have a serious issue with issues like gender-based violence, xenophobia, or racism, as I like to call it. What do you think is truly behind this rise in populism? And what can we do to stem, to prevent its global reach, really? Thanks.
You might have to explain that. No, because it's an assumption that I recognize, you've recognized populism, and you're asking why. And you expect an answer from me. The assumption of that is that I've also recognized the rise of populism. But have I? That's why I'm saying it needs a bit of an explanation. What is populism? Even that. How have you understood it? I'm asking you the questions in order to empower myself to answer you.
I didn't program this path. For me, the populism is when any kind of demagogue, any kind of person who's blessed with the gift of speech and the ability to sway the minds of people uses the basest of human kind of instinct. It's our fear of otherness. And our fear of otherness will drive us to do things that may, in some cases, harm ourselves. So when I say the rise of populism, it is when people will stand up and say to their citizens that immigrants are bad. People will say that people with different sexual orientations are bad. People will say that people who don't look like them are bad. And they can get that groundswell of emotion going to a point that they can uplift themselves into positions of power. And I think that's my definition of populism.
Hi there, Quinton Augustine. My question relates to, it's been said many times that education is the ultimate equalizer. And our leader, Isaac Smith, very often comes to us with very interesting books that we should read. And I thought, if I get the opportunity to speak to the ex-president, it's a very simple question. What books do you read? And perhaps give us a sense of some of the profound books that you read and how it influenced your life.
Good afternoon. My name is Fusiso. I'm a tech enthusiast, and whenever my mom has a challenge with her smartphone or anything, I'm the person that she calls. And I've just looked at it, and 2/3 of the workforce are over the age of 30. And I just wonder that as a young professional, looking at the fourth industrial revolution in the next 10 years or so, things are going to be disrupted, but most of these people are still going to be productive for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So what role can I play in terms of swaying that, the same as I do at home on a national level, and how do I formalize that?
The last question is at the very back.
My name is Zizwe Mbata, patron of Timali, Tata Thabo Mbeki. Yesterday you actually mentioned that the late former President Robert Mugabe was actually an African patriot. Now my question is how important it is that in the context of leadership, that when we look at leadership, we create a narrative or we actually try and put a true African narrative forward in the context of how our African leaders lead and the actions that they take, especially in the later years during their leadership?
Great. Patron, I don't know.
It's okay.
You can sit or you can maybe...
No, it's okay. It's better here. We were in not in Cape Town. We were here in Johannesburg a few months back. In fact, a year back. When there was a discussion about technology and education and knowledge. And I was asked to come to participate in this discussion. Indeed, we went and sat there for 2-3 hours, listening to very educated people talking about this matter. And so they asked me to speak at the end, which I did, essentially to say that I had not understood them at all. Truly, and that was my honest response, because what they spoke about really went over my head. And therefore requested that why don't we do something about that? Because I said to them that, I'm a chancellor of the University of South Africa, of UNISA, and the biggest college at the university is the Education College. So UNISA produces, I think, something like 60% of the teachers, new teachers being trained in the country. So that particular college, therefore, at UNISA becomes of particular importance with regard to this matter: technology, education, and so on. And I was saying to them that having listened to them to the extent that I could understand anything, if I went back to UNISA and said to them, look, this matter about technology and education is important, do something about it. And they would ask me a question, do what? Mr. Chancellor. And the Chancellor would not be able to answer that question. So I said to them, look, why don't we then work on this? Because I know, for instance, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg has been talking about this, the importance of introducing at universities proper courses on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. He was raising exactly the same point that has been raised, that you've got new people coming in, new younger generations who are going to be, who are born more or less into this period of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And if you don't empower them, there's going to be problems. Somebody was telling me the other day that there's some very smart person who says he wants to take out a legal case against a number of training institutions, because they are training people today for jobs which are going to be non-existent in 3 years and 5 years' time. And he was saying that's a criminal offense. So we agreed with that group of people that we were with a year ago to say, let's work then on something. How do you educate all of us, the young and the old, into this Fourth Industrial Revolution? And fortunately, there's a very, very knowledgeable people responded. And we had a meeting in Cape Town last week where they handed over the result of their work. It's a 200-page report on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It relates to education and training, and therefore the preparation of various generations in terms of mastery of this technology, so that then indeed you don't have somebody, as was indicated, who might be left behind in this regard. And I think it's the first comprehensive presentation in this country on that matter. Now the authors said, they gave me a copy. They said, you asked us to do this work, we've done it, here is a copy. 200 pages, I haven't read it. But they then said they are going to post it on the Thabo Mbeki Foundation website. I don't know if it's been posted yet. But elsewhere, because it's going to be I'm trying to respond to the question that was posed. It's going to be a very important engagement. This one, because indeed this Fourth Industrial Revolution is with us. It will be disruptive. It is disruptive of many things. But to master the technology, therefore, means to be able to adapt to that disruption in a manner that is productive. As a foundation, we are beginning next year, in January, beginning of the school academic year. We are going to be introducing, it's a trial project, tablets at 50 schools in Mpumalanga and the Eastern Cape, rural schools. This is because of the argument that given the impact of this technology on society, even children at primary school need to grow up being familiar with this technology, that they don't come across computers when they are wherever, that they get educated into this kind of technology from the beginning. So we, fortunately, with the support of some important foundations in Europe, they've agreed we'll go together. I'm saying we're trying a trial project with 50 rural schools, some of which, if they don't have electricity, might need solar panels and things like that. But in the end, to aim at reaching 1 million children, so that we really begin from there and not only deal with the Fourth Industrial Revolution technology education at university, but introduce this thing throughout the system. So that's what needs to happen. I hope that answers the question. Your mother, if she's listening, would have an opportunity then not only to depend on you, but she can also study for herself, to empower herself. Now books. I read many books about many things. In part because many authors send me books. In the last 3 weeks, I've received 3 books. I don't know the authors, but they send the books anyway, and with inscriptions, which obliges me to read the book because there must be a reason why the authors think I need to read the book. And I can only find that thing out after reading the book. So I have to read many books. But obviously books are important. Because I think when we're talking leadership, I think a first requirement of leadership surely must be an understanding of the reality with which you are dealing. As correct and truthful and objective an understanding of the reality you are dealing with rather than an imagined reality. I think that's your first starting point. It doesn't matter what the issue is. That understanding becomes important, therefore books become important. One of the books I'm about to finish now is a small book. It's not quite related to what I've just said, but it's one of these books which I get from the authors. Now this one is from a niece of mine, and she has just got a doctorate at the Free University in Amsterdam. And she decided to study the impact of nutrition on the slaves that were imported into the Cape from the 17th, 18th centuries. Now, in the slaves, so she talks about the slaves. They came from Malaya. They came from Indonesia. They came from what is Sri Lanka today, from Madagascar, from Mozambique. And why she decided on this topic, I don't know. But it was, when she told me, I thought it was a very interesting idea. The impact of nutrition on slaves in the 17th and 18th century. How are you going to study that? The poor slaves are dead. But she did, because then they have to do tests on the bones and look at the molars and this and that and the other. Very fascinating story. I'm not talking about the scientific part of it. I skip those pages. It's the historical part, when she says they came from here, they were like this, and so on. But that's an aside. Some years back, we hosted the former president of Haiti, President Aristide, for a number of years. Haiti, you'd recall, became independent in 1804. It was called the First Black Republic because it was the result of a rebellion of the slaves against France, against Napoleon. And the French, Napoleon sent an army to Haiti to suppress the slave uprising, and the slaves defeated that army. And Haiti became independent beginning of 1804. So 2004 was the bicentenary of the liberation of Haiti. So we discussed this matter at the African Union. That is a very important occasion for us as Africans, and it will be important that we join the Haitians as they celebrate that bicentenary. So let's all go. Agreed? We all agreed. But as it happens, there were only 2 delegations that participated in those celebrations. It was ourselves and traditional leaders from Benin. And the reason for the traditional leaders from Benin is because a lot of the slaves that ended up in Haiti originally came from what is now Benin. The rest of my colleagues did not come. It was very restive at the time. There were people who were very determined to overthrow the government of President Aristide. So even while we were there, there was shooting taking place in various parts of the island. And then President Aristide said, look, there's agitation against the government. we are willing to have, I'm willing to have early elections. Secondly, I'm willing to reconstitute the Electoral Commission so that even the opposition parties are satisfied about how it is composed, and therefore have these early elections and let the matter be decided like that. And then he asked me, he said, can you therefore please speak to the opposition to tell them that. So indeed, meeting of the opposition was convened, and we told them that President Aristide agrees with your demand there must be early elections. Number two, agrees that the Electoral Commission must be reformed so that everybody is satisfied about this composition. And therefore, you people must enter into negotiations between yourselves and the government. In the end, they agreed. The political parties first, and then they insisted that we should then also meet civil society organizations because they would have to be taken on board. We did that, and the matter was agreed by, therefore, the government, the opposition, political parties, civil society, that they would get together and negotiate this agreement. That was January 2004. February 2004. So we left Haiti, and the matter was going to be handled by Jamaica, was going to chair the negotiations, and we would act in support of Jamaica. So we left, came home. And then sometime in February 2004, the US ambassador in Pretoria calls me to say he'd like to see me, so I see him. And he says to me, I have a message from Washington. And the message is that President Aristide wants to leave office and come to South Africa. No, he just now awaits the permission of the South African government to therefore take off from Haiti. That conflict I was saying, which was there already in January, had intensified. So he wants to leave to come to South Africa. So I said, Ambassador, just give me and his agent. Washington says matter is urgent. I said, give me some time, let me reflect on it. I'll come back to you. So I contact some of the prime ministers in the Caribbean to say, but what is the story that I'm told by the Americans about the President Aristide wants to abdicate? And they say, no, they don't know anything about that. So then I go back to the American ambassador because I was going to say to him, well, nobody in the Caribbean knows anything about President Aristide leaving. And number two, normally he would contact me if he wanted to come to South Africa. So the ambassador, he starts off, when I get through to him, he starts off by laughing. And then he apologized. He said, no, President, I apologize, but I'll explain why. No need for you to explain. President Aristide has already left Haiti. And he says, the reason I'm laughing is because he's not coming to South Africa. He's going to the Central African Republic. So I say, Ambassador, how does Aristide get there? He says, well, that's why I'm laughing, because a very, very odd thing that he would leave and go there. When we found out later that they had been called, the government in the Central African Republic had been called by the President of France to say, you must receive Aristide. And what had happened is that Aristide was taken and they put him on a plane, the Americans, and they flew him to the Central African Republic. So in the end, that's how Aristide ended up here. Now, the reason I'm telling you this long story, it's about books. There is the political party of President Aristide in Haiti is called Famille Lavalas. It's Creole, Haitian, but it means the flood. An American historian then 2004, I think, published a book called Damming the Flood. Damming meaning to build a dam. Damming the Flood. It's about what had happened in Haiti. So you read this book and discover that what we're trying to do in Haiti in January 2004 was a complete waste of time. Because the very same people were sitting with negotiating that they must enter into negotiations with President Aristide to have early elections, Those same people were talking to the Americans who had already decided to remove Aristide by force. So we are praising ourselves as we flew home to say there will be peace and negotiations. It's completely false. Unfortunately, the book came after Aristide had already been removed. But when you read the book, you came to understand the reality of Haiti. If we had had an understanding of that reality before, we might have intervened in a different way. So that's what I'm saying. And give an example of the importance of books and why I read books. There are a number of books just currently now. We know all of us here are aware that the South African economy is very sickly. And so a couple of books have come out, books and booklets on the economy, which one has to read. Because we've got to answer the question, what do we do about this economy? I don't know to what extent these particular books reflect this thing I'm talking about, an objective reality of South Africa, so that by the time you say this is what needs to be done, it's based on a proper understanding of what's happening in the country. I don't know if they do that, but they have to be read for that purpose. The matter about populism, wherever populism occurs, this is my view, wherever populism occurs, it's a demonstration of political bankruptcy. It would normally be a populist stance. It would be taken by somebody who is not in reality interested in solving any problem. They might take a populist position in order to advance their own personal interests. That's why personally, instinctively, I get very worried about the superlatives describing situations. Now, when you say such and such a country is the crime capital of the world, I worry about that. Because my suspicion is that whoever makes that statement has actually not studied crime statistics of 190 countries. They haven't. They have an impression, maybe, or they have an objective to pursue, and therefore will say things like that. But I'm trying to say that populism, in my view, is indeed a reflection of that. A political bankruptcy, which has nothing to do with solving whatever the issues that are being raised, whether it's matters of gender violence or crimes of xenophobia or anything of these sorts. I think it would be the responsibility of certainly, any progressive movement to want to stand up against that populism. I get into problems. I have been getting into problems for some time. When I've tried to resist this notion that we as South Africans are xenophobic, I say I don't agree. And I give an example, for instance, of taking an old township here in Johannesburg, Alexander Township. Alex is 100 years old plus. And for many, many years, many of those 100 years, you've had people there coming from Mozambique, from Zimbabwe, from all around. It's the way the South African economy developed. The mining industry which attracted these people. So we've had these African populations from outside of the borders of South Africa for very many, many years. My wife comes from Alexander. And she says, but we always lived with all these people. You get, for instance, in Durban, there's a group of people there in Durban who are called Amazinzimban. They're people from Zanzibar, but they call them Amazinzimban, who've lived there and nobody's ever attacked them or anything like that. So I say, even the instances where you get these attacks, like what happened now, last week here, or if it was last week, here in the Johannesburg Metro and Ekurhuleni. I read, for instance, a report that one of the attacks in Springs, it's in the media here, people were offloaded by bus. They were brought by bus to come and attack some shop. It's not an instinctive thing, a spontaneous thing from people in the township who then get up and say, because we hate these ones, we're going to attack them. Somebody hires a bus, collects people, delivers them, they attack, they are collected by bus and taken away. That's organized. Judge Niva Pillay, you know, these attacks took place in Durban, I think around 2015. And they asked the government there, Judge Niva Pillay, to set up a commission under her to look at this matter. What happened? It was exactly the same thing. In that case, it was the South African traders. In order to get rid of their competition, they organized this thing and then blame all of us for being xenophobic. It was entirely a business arrangement. So I'm saying an understanding of the objective reality becomes important. The use of populism as slogans, I think is very dangerous. And whoever resorts to that, populism, I think they're making a negative statement about themselves. I think it's people that we ought to say we don't want to have anything to do with populists. That would be my view. Our colleague at the back there was asking a question about African leadership. And he said something about, as these leaders are getting old. I thought he was talking about myself. No, even that, you see, there are obviously some things there which are not right on the continent. For instance, this phenomenon, which we've tried to oppose, of people perpetuating themselves in power. You remember that historically what's happened here on the continent is as the countries became independent around 1960, thereabouts, many countries become independent. Not long after, you started having military coups. Lots and lots of military coups. Then the democratization process kicks in around the 1990s. And so all of these processes, including South Africa and so on. So you then see that what happens during that democratization process during the 90s, a lot of the constitutions will give two-term limitations. And this was not necessarily because it's particularly democratic to have two terms. There are many democratic countries in the world which have no terms. The UK and the Germans and, you know. But the reason the continent took that position was out of the experience we had had with the military coups. That it would be better, given our historical experience, that we limit the time when people sit in positions of leadership. Hence the two-term limitations. I think it was a correct decision, certainly in our context. So therefore, we have generally opposed people trying to remove those limitations. Because they end up with that perpetuation of people in positions of power. I'm saying there are wrong things like that are happening. But, of course, part of the challenge is that when countries hold referenda, let's hold a referendum to decide whether we want two terms or limitless terms. And the referendum is held, and the result is that we don't want term limitations. So the constitution gets changed. So what do you do about that? You might say, I don't like it, but I might say, but it's the will of the people. So I'm saying that things like that, which really ought to be avoided. Now, in terms of specific wrong things that might happen in countries, I don't think they depend on age. I think they depend on the politics of the people concerned. So the qualification you were putting there, especially as they get older, I don't think applies. I think we can do wrong things at any age. So I don't want to us to discuss the politics of Zimbabwe. You meant because I'm saying that because you mentioned Zimbabwe. I don't want us to go there because we can, if Tsepo here decided that, all right, let's extend our session by 6 hours, 8 hours, then we can. Because again, this is part of what I'm trying to insist on. A proper understanding of what we're dealing with is important. So that we can then come to right conclusions. Not necessarily because this thing has been repeated so many times, therefore it must be true. When I was speaking in Durban yesterday on Zimbabwe, I read a sentence from an article which appeared in one of the South African papers in the last few days. And that sentence says that we, our government, refused to do what the people of Zimbabwe were demanding, the overthrow of Mugabe. We refused to do that. Therefore, we betrayed the people of Zimbabwe. So I read this thing. There was never, ever a single occasion when the people of Zimbabwe said to us, overthrow Mugabe. Never happened. The people who said they overthrow Mugabe were the British. It was not Zimbabweans. Even the opposition party, the MDC, who were the first ones who asked us to intervene with regard to Zimbabwe matters. The MDC said, Changirai, please help us to put us together with the ruling parties and PF so that together as Zimbabweans we can decide on the future of our country. So fine, okay, let's do that. We tried to do that. In the end, they came to an agreement. But I'm saying that you would find statements like that, which have got absolutely no basis in fact, that the people of Zimbabwe wanted us to overthrow Mugabe. But in reality, even if they'd asked us, we would have refused. Because it wouldn't be task of the South African government to go around overthrowing other governments. That's the regime change is somebody else's agenda. I don't think it can be our agenda here. We wouldn't be that kind of country. Therefore, I think I've answered those questions. Thanks. Yes,
I think we have traversed both the historical, the current, and the future. For IR, what's happening in Zim, and also dealing with Zim, also dealt with the past. I did say earlier that the second round will be special. Any hands? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's left, my left. I hope all of your questions are not left in their orientation. So it's all ladies. I've noted you, sir, I've noted you. In that order, Ayanda, and then we'll follow my sister.
Former President, it's an honor to be here today and to listen to you speak. In forming Timali, you had a vision for what Africa and what African leadership is all about. Moving 50 years ago, how do you envisage that Africa would be if this project is a success? What kind of leaders should we be having in this continent? What are the attributes and what are the things that they should be able to achieve? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Former President and everybody. My question is on the attacks that was happening in the couple of days. I want to know what is your opinion in the way our current president handled the situation in terms of responding to the situation. Would you have handled it differently if you were the current president?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sanele Mjali. My question to the former president is, sorry, I had it written down here.
Technology.
What is the one mistake, or rather, what is the one characteristic that isn't very great that you have witnessed leaders around you having?
I think I noted hands already. So you are noted. You are noted.
Good afternoon, former President and also the guest. My name is Danielle. I don't think this is much, well, I've got two parts, a comment and a question. Your speech you made 1996 on behalf of the African National Congress, I'm an African, I think that's probably one of the speeches that always resonates with me, especially when I look at the situation that South Africa finds itself in. I think we often forget that we are African. We forget our pride, we forget our struggle, and we forget our liberation. I believe that you can be an optimist and you can be a pessimist. I find that the current situation, we're less optimistic than what we should be. And I think it's such not a shame, but a loss, because of the fact that, you know, we've come so far in the struggle for liberation that we often forget to acknowledge our wins, to look at where we are, to look at where we were. And I believe that that's the one thing that we never should forget as South Africans. My question to you is, former President, what is your vision, what is your outlook of the future for South Africa, especially looking at everything that's happening in terms of gender-based violence, in terms of the economy, in terms of the xenophobic attacks that is happening? I'd really like to know what your views are. Thank you.
Good afternoon, former President. Good afternoon, colleagues, esteemed guests. My name is Nolene Tahani. It's a pleasure to meet you again. You conferred my honors degree in economics earlier this year at the University of South Africa. And so my question obviously is economically related. So given the economic tailwinds of our country, the large Gini coefficient that we have, the ever-growing unemployment rate, and the violence that we've seen recently, right? How do we bridge the gap? It's a conversation that's ongoing, but the problems seem to be just getting bigger. And then the second part of my question relates to financial literacy. As a financial advisor, what I've seen is that we lack financial literacy, right, on a very large scale. And the problem is it's not a profitable thing to do, so it's just not getting done. It's not getting done in disadvantaged communities. It's not getting done on a national platform. How do we change that? And then finally, my role as an individual, how do I contribute to being part of the solution as an individual, not associated to any organization? How do I myself contribute to the financial literacy without being a financial advisor associated to PPS? Thank you.
I think there's another hand. Yes, on that row. Somehow somebody sneaked in to ask a question. So, to be yourself and you be last, eh? Yes.
Man. Good afternoon, everybody. Mr. President, former President. My name is Refilwe and I'm from Alex. My question is with regards to African Renaissance. I understand that it was something that you spearheaded in 1997, and somehow it went, and I don't personally know as to where it actually ended up. And last year, I read an article on the Mail and Guardian that you were gonna be called back to finish the project, as you were deemed as the person who actually started it and have more knowledge in terms of what is happening in the continent. So my question is, where is it? Is it still coming, or it's something that you're still thinking about it? Because I understand that they didn't actually, they said they will ask you to come back and not give you an opportunity to say no.
I'm presuming you're referring to when Mr. Lindiwe Sisulu was
Yes.
referring to the South Africa's foreign policy.
Correct, yes.
All right.
Good afternoon, everyone.
No. We are skipping you for now.
Last.
The lady next to you, yes, her. I promised you next round.
Oh.
Yes.
Good afternoon, former President. My name is Dumi. My question is, with regards to the leadership, specifically in the ANC, we've had a few leaders, Julius Malema, Cyril Ramaphosa, Jacob Zuma, even Robert Mugabe, who've been very divisive in their leadership, in public opinion. They've created negative perceptions. What is the extent of your involvement in the future leadership of the ANC, especially economically?
President, I think I'm going to step aside.
Yes, sure. I hope I've written down all of these questions. Somebody asked a question about the recent attacks against his foreign shops and so on, and whether the president handled them correctly and whether I would join him, I would do the same or not do the same. There's the former High Commissioner of Nigeria to South Africa, who went back, finished his tour of duty here and went back to Nigeria last year. Well, let me start off by saying you will remember, of course, that the government of Nigeria and the population have been very upset about what's been happening here, and they've made that thing very clear. Now, I'm coming back to my story. The High Commissioner, he finished his term of duty here last year, went back to Nigeria. And at some point, he gave a speech. He spoke in Nigeria. And he said something which is very important. He said, out of every 4 Nigerians killed in South Africa, 3 are killed by other Nigerians. And he said it's mainly turf wars around the matter of drugs. Now, I'm saying as a former ambassador of Nigeria to this country, who was saying the story that you are told, that the South Africans are after killing Nigerians is not true. This is a practical reality. As I was saying, that he gave the figure that 3 out of 4 Nigerians were killed in South Africa would be killed by other Nigerians. You see, that raises a question about this matter. As I was saying, if you take the recent attacks, my view, and it's a view, I can't say I've done research to establish this, is that these were organized attacks and not spontaneous. They are organized in order to achieve particular purposes. So you get them in these various portions. Today we are in Guatemala in Springs, another day we are in Jeppestown, another day we are in Alex and all that. I'm saying it's organized to achieve particular purposes. So if I were the government, that's the first thing I would say. These are organized attacks to achieve particular purposes. The Reverend Mishwe spoke sometime last week, leader of the ACDP, and actually raised a similar question. He said, who are the masterminds? Because if we don't solve that question, these attacks will all okay again. If we come to the conclusion that the population in Dube Township in Soweto is xenophobic, and that's what our problem is, then we have to answer the question, therefore, how do we engage that population in Dube to make sure that it ceases being xenophobic? And I would imagine that if you convene that population of Dube into a hall and said to them, look, I'm bringing you together because I think you are xenophobic, they would stone you. They would say, whoever told you we hate other people because they are other people? I'm saying if we don't find the people behind organizing these attacks, they will recur. Because we're not looking at the real problem objectively. You saw these figures that I've been given about how many people died. 8, 10 or 12 or something. 12? 10 of whom are South African. 2 of whom are Zimbabweans. But the biggest outcry about Nigeria, people being killed, is from Nigeria. I spoke to the premier of the province, David Makura, and I said to him, you know, Premier, my request, can you please ask the provincial police to give a report about who owned the shops that were attacked? I haven't seen that information. As a result of the absence of factual information of this kind, then people create their own stories. Because I was saying to him, Premier Makura, that, you know, I suspect that the people who are attacked are Pakistanis, people from Bangladesh, and people from Somalia. Those might be very well the biggest groups. Then there would be people from other nationalities. So that we get a proper picture. Because part of the story that is put across is that no, this thing is not only xenophobia, it's Afrophobia. These South African Africans hate the other Africans from the rest of the continent. But I'm saying if you looked at the shops, I hope the police will produce the statistics. Which shops were attacked? Who owned and ran the shops? And again, I mean, if you go to many of the African townships, again, something that's established when people look at these matters objectively, that in many instances, this Somali shop in my yard used to be my shop. But I found it more economically rewarding if I lease the shop to a Somali and he pays me rent. So he must stand behind the counter and do all the hustling, get the money, but at the end of the week or month, I get mine. That is our own people who created this kind of space. So I'm saying a proper understanding of this matter is critically required. And I personally don't think that we have, as a country, not just government, I don't think as a country we've really done a proper analysis of this. I was telling you earlier, for instance, about the report done by Judge Pillay, Neva Pillay, about similar attacks in Durban, which I think was in 2015, when she had then had a thorough look at this thing and was able to say this is reality, which means now that you have understood this thing properly, therefore you are able to engage it properly. I think that is, in my view, is that we still need to do some work in order to understand what happened here in these last few days, particularly with regard to the attacks against the shopkeepers in this metro, Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni. I'd also spoken to some other people about what happened when some of the traders chased away the police. And a lot of us, of course, naturally said, but this is wrong, illegal. Of course it was. You can't go around beating up the police. And people correctly said this is wrong. Sure it was. But having said that, you need to ask the question why. Why did they do it? These are these migrant people in this country who are running the shops. And therefore, by definition, very vulnerable. Maybe I can come and say you are undocumented and therefore out or something. Why would people like that, in a very precarious situation objectively, as these non-nationals, why would they attack the police? Let's ask that question. It was a criminal thing to attack the police, correct. But why did they do it? Unfortunately, you remember that particular instance. The police helped us to answer that question. Because even as they were doing those raids, they arrested 8, 9, 10 of their own officers who were trading in counterfeit goods. They go and raid your shop. They raid your shop and they take the counterfeit goods and come back to you to say, buy back your goods. I've been told of instances where quite a lot of the non-nationals are saying that really we wish a situation at our homes was better. Because you get police officers, this is not a condemnation of South African Police Service, some police officers, regularly, I'm talking about a woman who runs a hairdressing shop. Regularly, this officer will come to demand so much money every month. And the poor woman, she knows that if she doesn't give the money, this police officer is going to cook up some story to get her deported. Now I'm saying, I said to somebody, please can you investigate why those traders in central Johannesburg did a very wrong thing of chasing away the police. There was a reason for it. As I was saying, fortunately, the police helped us to answer that question, because that was part of the reason. Because of a persistent misbehavior by certain members of the South African Police Service, who extort bribes from people. And you are obliged to give the bribe. I'm talking about women who say sometimes they are obliged to sleep with these police officers. Because if they don't, they know they are going to be chased out. Why are we not raising these things so that we can act correctly? And that's what I'm saying. You see, it's important, I think, to have an objective understanding of what is happening in this reality so that we know what it is that we need to change. And with regard to the current attacks, I think the first starting point is to answer the question that Bishop Mishwe, Reverend Mishwe put, who are the masterminds? That needs to happen. And I'm saying that question is a question that must be answered, certainly by government, but I think the rest of society as well. When the question asked about mistakes, I'm not so sure it can be answered easily, of people around yourself and so on. There are a number of mistakes. Let's talk about ourselves here. There's clearly a number of mistakes we made. I'm talking about the time we were in government. You remember we used to have technical colleges. I think they're called TVET colleges now. Those colleges, when we got into government, we handed them over to the provinces. They became the special responsibility of the provinces. So the provincial education departments would be in charge of basic education and technical colleges, and national government universities and higher education. During one election campaign, we visited one of these technical colleges in Pretoria. They were doing all sorts of things, electrical things and so on. And the same day we went to the BMW plant in Pretoria, in Roslyn. And as we were talking to the management, one of the questions we raised was, we hope you people are taking students who are qualifying from that technical college. And they say, yes, we are. But the problem is that we've got to train them from the beginning. So why? Because at the technical college, they are using equipment that is 15 years old, long overtaken by technological development. So by the time they come to us here at BMW, the equipment we use is modern, and they are completely unfamiliar with this. So when the government changed 2009 and President Zuma took over, they took a correct decision, which was to move the technical colleges to national. Because what was happening in the provinces was that as they do their budgets for education, they would budget for primary, secondary school, high school, and if there was anything left over, then it would go to the technical colleges. Now, I'm saying this was an important mistake, bad mistake on our part, because a very important contributor to these very high levels of unemployment in the country is lack of skills. You have lots and lots of people, as all of us know, who are unemployed. but more tragically are unemployable because they don't have the skills. Now here is an institution, the technical colleges, which should have been producing the skills that are required as part of our response to the question of unemployment. And what we did was to handle them in a manner that they couldn't do this thing that was required of producing the skilled people. Then that was a bad mistake. The attempts to correct it, I hope that they have succeeded. There's been this debate in the country about the land question. Yeah, quite correct. We have to do something about the land issue and so on. But I was saying to some people a couple of weeks back that agriculture in this country accounts for something like 3 or 4% of GDP. 3 or 4% of the wealth of South Africa comes from agriculture. Now, as we discuss the land thing, the way I'm listening to some people, if you don't address this matter of the land redistribution, you are never going to solve these problems of inequality. So I say, you cannot say the overwhelming majority of the population of this country, the African black, must concentrate on the 3% of the wealth of the country and do nothing about the 97. Doesn't make sense. So let's deal with the land question, but let's do it understanding what the objective reality is. Now, say, even if you look at the land restitution process, land claims, up to now, in the majority of cases where people have won their claims to land, they've opted to take money, not land. What conclusion do we draw from that? It might be that it was maybe land in wrong places, which is why people didn't want it. I don't know. But I'm saying the objective reality is that in the majority of successful land claims, the population has opted for money rather than the land. I'm raising this matter because we might make another mistake of thinking that the resolution of the economic challenges of the country, including problems of inequality, unemployment, that the resolution of those questions resides in the resolution of the land question, which would be a very, very wrong conclusion. I don't know where I was where this matter arose. I think it was maybe at Timali. And said, all right, let us assume that things will go ahead and land will be expropriated without compensation. Please, you who are in this room, how many of you agree to be farmers? And nobody raised their hand. They don't want to be farmers. Even here. Oh, there are 2 hands. There's only one. So I'm saying that it's necessary objectively to understand these things correctly. And I'm saying that with this, that I was citing one mistake that we made here. There are probably other mistakes which have to do with an understanding of how a capitalist economy functions. 2-3 years back, the deputy head of the IMF visited South Africa. And he gave a speech at Wits University, and made a very interesting observation. And he said there are many structural changes which need to take place with regard to the South African economy. But one of the things that needs to happen is that the South African government must understand that there are certain things, certain policies, which if you introduce them in a country like the UK or the US or Germany and so on, will work, but will not work if you introduce them in South Africa. That you must understand that. Therefore, they are wrong policies. Policies which may be right generally somewhere else, but are wrong for South Africa. That needs to be looked at. That's why I'm saying that might have been another mistake, that we didn't understand properly the functioning of a capitalist system here in South Africa, and therefore introduce policies which are going to produce negative results. An example of that, for instance, is we had a long time ago now an international advisory council on the economy. It was made up of senior business people from around the world. There were 2 Americans who sat in that panel committee, and they kept raising a question. And that question was, why are many of the South African corporations, why do they hold such large volumes of assets as cash, abnormally high in terms of international business standards? So each time we met twice a year. And each time we met, they would pose this question. And we kept running away from it. The reason we're running away from it, because we're embarrassed. Because the reason for that was that a lot of your big corporates were uncertain about the future of the country. They proceed from the position that in South Africa, this transition which took place from apartheid to democracy was too good to be true. Sooner or later, something is going to explode. After all, this is an African country. Now, once you put your money in building a factory, you have to run. You have to run because something has exploded. You can't run with the factory. But with the cash you can. Which is why the companies maintained high liquidity rates, because of their uncertainty about the future. Now, what I'm being told now by some people who are more knowledgeable than I, that we're back to the same phenomenon. Among the corporate world, a lot of uncertainty about the future of this country, and one doesn't blame them. And the consequence is, let us take as many of our assets out of the country as possible, because we don't know what's going to happen here. So the IMF man was saying, when you introduce particular policies to impact on South African capitalist economy, don't expect that necessarily it will behave in the same way as would happen in the UK or the US. And he was right. And part of the reason was exactly that the sentiment of the business community here about the future of the country would be different. Once, that's one last thing about this. Once I traveled with, I was flying to England, I don't know why. And I was from here wearing a suit and a tie. And I don't know, somebody must have bought a ticket because I was in business class. And then next to me was a German who was wearing jeans. And he told me that, no, he is in the construction industry. So I come to the conclusion, given the way he's dressed, that maybe he is a salesman in the construction industry. But as we're getting close to landing in London, he tells me a story. He says, you know, we, as business people, were faced with a particular challenge when the reunification of Germany took place. Because Helmut Kohl was chancellor. Helmut Kohl would call us in and say, there's a company so-and-so in East Germany, which is in crisis. You've got to take it over, invest in it, rebuild it, keep people employed, and we would have to do that. So I said, I'm very interested in this. He says, because it was a national task. The reunification of Germany was a national task. So even us as business people, when we're instructed by the government to make our own contribution to that, we would do that. And so in the end, he says, well, for instance, in my case, I was summoned, and so I'm beginning to say to myself, he can't be a salesman. He's, no, the chap was the owner of a big building firm in Germany. And that's how they behaved. There's a national task. The reunification of Germany affects all Germans. But here, if we say they are national tasks to eradicate poverty, will we all respond in the same way? So I'm saying that must have been a mistake also, that we didn't quite understand the functioning of the capitalist system here in South Africa, and therefore acted in ways that were not quite right. But I think the point that is made that we need to be a bit more optimistic about our future is correct. It's correct because I think if my own interaction with our own population here, black and white, indeed is many, say overwhelming majority of South Africans are very positive about this country and very committed to make it succeed. I'm sure you people here at PPS are exactly of the same mind. So I think that we've got a sufficient pool of brains, of skill, of whatever that we need to make sure that we do make a success of the country. But again, I come back to this matter that it's very important that we understand what it is, the nature of the problem. The 70% wealth, a few years ago, let me say 10 years ago, or more, probably 80%, 85% of violent crimes against the person, that would include rape, that would include murder, it would include assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, those sorts of offenses occurred between Friday evening and Monday morning. Over 80%. I think in the latest crime statistics, they say it's 70%. So you can tell, just looking at those figures, where the source is of this. I'm talking just now about crimes against the person. They are very, very closely related to abuse of alcohol and drugs in the poorest areas of our country. Inevitably. I'm telling too many stories today. Once I was in Finland, and the Prime Minister of Finland organized a dinner with the corporate chiefs of Finland, including people from Nokia, Finnair, big companies. And they raised a question about crime in South Africa. So fortunately, I had been looking at the crime figures. So I was saying to them, sure, there are high levels of crime, but you've got to try and understand and break these figures down. So I say to them, you see, for instance, if you go to Rosebank in Johannesburg, you are not going to be robbed as you're walking down the street. The problem you'll have in Rosebank is housebreaking and theft, which will occur in many instances when you are not in a house. And then you'll have breaking into businesses. But these other crimes of murder and so on are not likely. So, but if you go to other areas of Johannesburg, yes, indeed. So two of these business people, they say, well, it's very interesting. I was still Deputy President. It's very interesting, Deputy President, that you say that, because each time I'm in Johannesburg, I stay at the Hyatt in Rosebank. And I walk around and nothing has ever happened to me. Another one joins that. And so the Prime Minister says, then why did you ask the Deputy President about crime? When in fact, your own experience is that you've never experienced it. The ambassador of Finland was there. So he says he had hired a South African lawyer. Not hired him, but on what we call it, on retain. And retained this lawyer because I know for a fact that these Finnish visitors who are coming here as tourists, as business people, are going to be affected by this crime. So we have this lawyer ready to go and intervene. And he says this man has been with us now for 10 months and has really only dealt with one case. So again, the Prime Minister says, but you must explain. The man says, the ambassador, he says, no, there is a Finnish fellow who was arrested for fraud, charged, found guilty, sentenced, is serving a sentence. Now he wants to be released to prison in Finland and maintains contact with this lawyer of ours. Say, please, can you intervene with the South African government to transfer me to prison in Finland? But please, not during the Finnish winter. So the ambassador says, that's really all the cases dealt with. In 10 months. Well, no, apart from the usual Finnish cases. So they all laugh. So I don't know the usual Finnish cases. So they then explain, they say, no, you see, the part of the challenge in Finland that alcohol is very expensive. It's deliberate government policy to discourage drinking. So when they get to South Africa, it's holiday time. So They all get arrested for drunkenness in the street, and they cool down in the prison cells. And so they then say, no, this thing that we reason we ask Prime Minister this question is because that's what the South Africans tell us. And the South Africans will tell us you must be very careful, there's a lot of crime and this and that and the other, and we respond to that. It's not that we as Finns have had that kind of experience. But I'm again coming to this point. When we say 70% of this kind of crime occurs over weekends in the poorest areas of the country, what's our response? Is it policing? Let's put more police on the beat. At some point, we engage the churches. And we think to the churches that they actually have the most extensive network in these areas affected by this kind of crime. All the various denominations. They will all have them have a church in this township. Why on the weekends? What are the priests doing? Because the priests matters that are going to occur, and people come out of these taverns or shebeens or places like that. Are we interacting with this population? Well, we were discussing that matter with the churches as to how we might respond to that, to use an institution like that to impact in these areas of very high crimes of a particular kind. The only thing I'm trying to urge all the time is a proper understanding of what we're up to, the nature of the challenge we face, so that we're then able to respond correctly. And I think on that basis, it is really possible to be optimistic about the future of the country. I think that relates to the matter of the Renaissance. The word Renaissance, as you know, it really means rebirth. And that's what we're trying to communicate, that it is possible. We have to strive for the rebirth of the continent. Rebirth means attend to everything. Matters of culture, matters of economy, matters of education, matters of everything. That let's all, as Africans, say that this is the Africa we want. That reborn Africa. This is the Africa we want, and let's strive to get it. It was out of that perspective that, for instance, you had economic programs which we worked on, like what became NEPAD, the new Partnership for Africa's Development, out of which came things like the African peer review system, so that we could sit together as Africans and review ourselves to say you are misbehaving. This is the correct way to treat things like this. It was out of all of that. Those institutions remain. Like I'm saying, NEPAD, peer review mechanism, they remain, they're still there. Well, quite what they are doing is something else. But I think it is possible. One of the problems, I think, the challenges that we face on the continent, you can see it in terms of what has happened. There used to be a very strong and very active All-African Students' Union, which involved all of these African universities and very active young people at universities, concerned about education on the continent, about other challenges on the continent. That organization has died. There was the All-African Conference of Churches, still there. Used to be very active, very visible. the voice of the church in terms of the future of the continent, very strong. But over the years, it disappeared virtually. Similarly, you had an All-African Trade Union Council. It's dead. Women's organization, same, has died. There's a particular voice on the continent which used to be very strong and very vibrant, which was about this renaissance of the continent, with us acting together as Africa, as Africans, to produce this Africa we want. That voice has died. We don't discuss this matter enough, and I think in the majority of cases people are not even aware of it. So the capacity that we had as a continent to take the continent forward kind of vanished. And so, therefore that voice we spoke about in African Renaissance, I think has become very, very weak. Something has to be done about that. I was never going to be recalled to do anything about it. But continuously, this is the work that we do. We try to do, even this foundation, our foundation must try and focus on that matter. We know we have, one of the things that we decided, the foundation decided, was to establish what is called a presidential library. So work has started. We're doing it together with UNISA, and work has started on that. So all of the papers have accumulated over many decades are being digitized and so on. So we are collecting this because there's a huge volume of knowledge here in the country, elsewhere on the continent, which in the past we have lost. For instance, even now, if you want to find a lot of the material concerning our own struggle here, from whenever, you'll find the bulk of that material is in the United States, not here. So we decided, no, let's correct that. This month, I hope, we are going to receive the Kwame Nkrumah archive, because what had happened was that Kwame Nkrumah's personal assistant, when Nkrumah got overthrown, he was in China. He got overthrown. The PA then made sure that she collected all his personal material, all of it. And when he came back from China, he went to Guinea, Conakry, and passed away in Conakry. And she collected material from Conakry. So this old lady has been holding this material for decades. She was in England. She passed away last year and handed over this Nkrumah archive to her son. The son decides this year that he is going to hand over this archive to the British Library. Now, the British Library is a very big library. It's a state library. It's very good, but he's going to hand over this material. Fortunately, the editor of the New African who's a Ghanaian, he gets an invitation to the ceremony where the British Library would be receiving the Nkrumah archive. And he immediately goes to see the man who's going to hand over the material to say to him, no, but you can't. This material belongs to Ghana or Africa generally, not to the British. So in the end, to cut a long story short, he talks to us, the editor of the New African, and we contact the man who's in control, who owns the Nkrumah archive. We say to him, look, we're setting up a presidential library. We believe the material should come here. Even if we hold it in custody for the Ghanaians. Unfortunately, he immediately agreed. So that's why the material should be here this month. So I'm mentioning that to say that I was giving an example of some of the work that the foundation is doing with regard to that renaissance. Because there's lots of material around, never mind South Africa, around the continent, which doesn't have a home. So as part of our contribution to making sure that this pool of African knowledge has a home, is preserved, and people have got access to it, that's something we can do. So at least I'm saying that the notion of optimism about the future of the continent, I agree with very fully. And in that context, I think the matter of the Renaissance becomes important. Let me just finish. The questions about leaders, the future leaders, including about the economy, what kind of leaders in 50 years' time, matters about financial literacy and what people can do. Generally, this leadership question. I think clearly what is being done here at PPS is very important in terms of answering that question. Or at Timali. The need for us to prepare the people, to give the people the necessary skills that are required in various fields. But I believe that we also need to say that people are not only technicians, so that you don't only have skills that are specific to your profession. To be able to play this leadership role, I think requires a broader exposure. When I was doing my master's degree in England in economics, my professor was Professor Bana, Thabo Bana. Thabo Bana, originally Hungarian, was a global world expert on input-output tables, material that is used in planning commissions. So he then says that he persuaded me to do a master's degree. So I said, okay. So I said, now, Professor, one of the things I want to therefore to do in this master's is this planning thing, this capacity for economic planning, taking advantage of the fact that he is there. So he refused. He said, not you. And Professor Bana says to me, look, you people here in South Africa are in struggle. One day you are going to be free. And I'm pretty certain that you are going to be in some leading position. Your task is not to understand input-output tables. Your task is to understand how societies change. So that's what you need to study. Because for this thing about input-output table, you will hire somebody. You will pay somebody who can do that. Your task is to help to bring about the social change. So, therefore, when you do the MA, why don't you look at matters like anthropology, society, sociology, things like that? so that you understand how. So that's what we had to do. The point I'm trying to make is that this leadership issue is not only about skills, technical skills in whatever the profession, but the capacity to lead also requires the need to understand this wider society. Like this question here, it seems quite clear that over the years since 1994, one of the things that has happened here is an increasing incidence of disrespect for the law, an increasing incidence of criminal behavior. It might express itself sometimes in simple forms. Municipal workers go on strike. It's perfectly their right to do so, to demand wages, better conditions, and all that. But then they litter the streets, they take bins, and why do you do that? Or people in Vuane, in Limpopo, because there's a problem about a municipal boundary. We don't want to be this side, we want to be that side. And they burn down schools. I'm saying an understanding of this. What is the cause for this increase in criminality? I think I was listening yesterday to the news that there's some problem at the University of Zululand, and they went and burnt down a police station. And you say, but what causes this thing? You can't have recent figures. The figures show increases in crimes of violence against women. Why is that? It's a wrong thing. It's a very bad thing. Why is it happening? I'm saying it's occurring in the context of a larger problem. Now, we need, among other things, therefore, a leadership to emerge which is able to deal with those kinds of situations. So I think the initiative of the PPS, Timali, to try and cultivate a leadership, which I'm saying is not only a leadership because of the particular skills it has, but it's got a leadership because it can help to impact in sense of changing society for the better. Now, I don't know what an individual can do in order to improve financial literacy, a question that was posed, but I would imagine that challenges of that kind are better dealt with through organized structures rather than individual interventions, I would imagine. But in the end, I think we have a responsibility to produce a leadership here at home on the continent, a leadership really that would be able to lead the country, the continent, out of the problems we are experiencing now. Because I think as I was saying, we have the intellectual capacity, and I think we have the will to produce that kind of leadership, which would make sure that indeed this vision of South Africa and Africa reborn, that renaissance actually takes place. I think we can do it, and in any case, I think we must. See, are we not running out of time? Thanks a lot, Sept.